All right, guys, this is the last project for our monthly class pack for Obvara and Sagger firing. And I really love this one. It's going to be a little covered jar with a domed lid. And basically what that means is we get all exterior. Nobody's ever going to see inside. You probably won't even put anything in there, but you could. So this will be a great surface to burnish and apply all the cool firing techniques that we're doing. I'm going to make it in two pieces, and a little trick that I got from Amanda Proctor is making the lid first, because for this form it's actually a lot easier to size the opening of the hole of the jar than it is to size the flange for your lid. You could do it the other way around, but I like this way that Amanda came up with for her cover jars, and I'm going to share it with you. So stay tuned. We're going to get it going right now. All right, I've got about a 4-pound log of clay here, and I'm going to tear off less than a pound for making my lid and ball that up and go ahead and get it going for the lid. And that's really just going to be a thick bowl because it's going to get trimmed later. Open down. And I'm going to split this rim. So I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to push back towards the inside. I'm going to make a little flange that comes up. And that's going to keep the lid on the jar. And that's pretty much it. This overhanging lid part is going to get trimmed so it doesn't stand too proud of the form. And I'm just going to set that aside. Then we're going to make the jar. I really like these things to flow way out wide and then come back in again. But that's not a shape that we actually throw into. We throw it more cylindrical and stretch it. It's just a much more practical way to make that kind of a form. Taking my time and making sure it's really well centered. So I want that hole in the top to end up round and in the middle. All right. I'm going to take this down to about a 1/4 inch thickness in the middle. And I will take a second to check it. Let's go a little bit deeper. And I'll come out not too far. I want to have a nice compact base here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull this up fairly straight ahead, straight up and down. And this is, a good 3.5 pounds of clay, so it can be a pretty substantial form. Don't want to get it too thin in the middle because I am going to be stretching it quite a bit. And I'm also going to leave it a little thick at the top because I'm going to be collaring in to make the opening size fit that flange on my lid. Let it flare out a little bit this time. And I'm going to collar the top as much as I can and still get my hand inside. There's really not a lot of call to leave this thick because I'm not going to be splitting to make a gallery. The gallery is built into the lid, or the flange I call it. I only call it a gallery if it sits horizontally for the lid to sit on. getting myself a little more height out of the form. I'm going to collar it down. All right, get the water out of the inside. And let's just go ahead and shape this thing. Stretching it out. Notice that I started up here at the shoulder. And worked my way down. I can come back up. I really want this lid to sit right down on the shoulder of the jar so that it almost looks like one form. So I'm not going to worry about leaving like a collar. I'll worry about the fit in a minute, but really stretching it out, getting a lot more volume out of that cylinder. Oops, did something you don't want to do, which is let go of that inside rib that's disappeared up against the inside here. Oof, that's spicy. It's really important to clean off the rib from time to time. Just so you don't get stuck. We're getting into some nice, real extreme shaping here. And now it's time to think about pausing and doing a little torch action on here. This could also be a good time to get a measurement for my lid. That's looking right spot on. It's really important when you stretch a form out to that kind of extreme to take a second and stiffen it up so you can put the finishing touches on. It's so sad when you end up losing the form because you just push it that little bit too far. I've got a really beautiful rounded curve down through the bottom, and I'll accentuate that later by trimming any trace of a little foot off of it. It's just going to come down, straight down to the wheel head. And going to try to lift the shoulder up. The shoulder is ever so slightly concave. And so I'm going to stiffen it enough that hopefully I can just lift up with my rib. I checked my opening size with the calipers and it's looking really good. Sometimes you can fiddle with it a little bit with the trim tool and perfect it, but I think that it's pretty darn close. And we're not going to be storing perishable things where we need it to really make an airtight seal. We're just trying to make it look really attractive. Just lifting up just a touch, try to accentuate that shoulder and have roundness both above and below the widest point. And it's getting there. I'm starting to be happy. Just to make sure I come away really gradually here. And I think I'm going to create, there's the hint of a detail already, just about a ½ an inch away from the lid opening. And so I'm going to just come in with the flat side of my rib and just work that corner up until I create just a little shadow line. And that's going to be lovely. I'm really working on smoothing out the form because, you know, these forms look so nice if they're just a blank canvas for our firing, and if they've got a lot of throwing lines or other jazz that normally I'm all about, they don't look as good when you put the terra sigillata on there and start burnishing. So I'm just really simplifying the surface to the maximum extent that I can. I think that is about where I want to be. I'm seeing a lot of smooth surface, a little bit more throwing evidence on the lower half below the equator. But I think sometimes I dig that actually. So we're looking really good. I'm going to come back in a little while and show you how to use the pot itself as a chuck to support the lid so that we can go ahead and refine the shape of that lid and make this whole thing look like one good finished pot. And really the key to that is trimming it on the pot itself so you can really assess the overall profile. So we're going to just do a little bit of torching, a little bit waiting, and coming back to show you the final touches. So hang in there. All right, so I have torched both the lid and the jar, and I have put the lid in the jar, and I'm setting a little Starbucks lid on top so that I can keep my finger on it and work on just trimming this lid nice and round. Now, when you're trimming stuff that's really wet, you want to stop frequently and get the trimmings off because they'll bump your tool and just mess up the accuracy of what you're trying to do. But I'm just going to keep working until I get a nice rounded dome. And because this form is so voluminous and round, I don't really want to do any details at all on the lid. I just want to keep it pretty much just a complementary dome shape and leave it at that. And I'll trim it first, and then I'll come back and use the rib on it to start the burnishing process, get rid of all the little drag lines. This clay's got a little bit of sand in it. I think I recycled a little bit of the old 290 schoolhouse ivory stone or whatever it was called. That was pretty sandy, so I'm getting some drag lines. Of course, if I get my tool up at the proper bevel angle, I'll have less of that happen. Just accidentally knocked it a little bit off center. So now if my lid had fit more perfectly, which it did not, it wouldn't have a chance to slide around. It would just be sitting perfectly in there. But my lid fit leaves a little bit to be desired. honestly, these forms, you know, they're not going to get a lot of hard use. They are pretty much just decorative pieces that are going to sit on a mantle somewhere looking pretty. So if you ever have a problem like I just did where you catch a tool and create a problem for yourself, if you switch to using the skinniest part of the tool, you can get a chance to even everything back out. Increase the wheel speed, really lock in on this tool. And then I can come smooth out all the little ridges that are created by using the skinny part. But if you go in there and try to fix it with a broad surface, it's just going to keep catching on what it caught on in the first place, and you're going to get not the result you're after. The main thing is just to be patient and take your time, cut it off a little bit at a time, and keep lifting the tool so you can remove those trimmings. Trying to keep them from falling down on the shoulder of the jar where they might leave little marks, because I've got it really smoothed out nicely. I want to kind of keep it that way. All right, let's try to take one more little final pass, get a nice smoothing cut all the way along. So much for one final pass. As soon as you say that, of course, a bunch of goobers are going to stick back to it. That is not what you want to have happen. So you have to be much more careful and take a lighter cut when you're making the final pass, because it is just sitting on there, and I didn't have my jar lid, so I've taken a big giant gouge out of that top, and I've got to assess whether there's enough thickness for me to recover, and the answer is pretty much no. So I'll probably be making a fresh lid for this one, but it gives you an idea, and it also makes it really clear that it's not completely foolproof. You can at the last minute catch the tool and foul things up, so be careful. Sometimes something like that can give you a creative opportunity to figure out, maybe I'm going to make a little sculpture and set it on top, and that's going to kind of distract your eye. Or, you know, you saw how quickly the lid was made. It's not a big deal. You can make another one and dry it down with the torch and just go ahead and put it right on top and pretend none of that unfortunate business ever happened. So anyway, that's the idea. Nice rounded curve. I would then come back with my Cheryl rib and smooth it nice and flat, kind of burnish out the trimming marks, and dry it on down to bone dry. Apply your terra sigillata. I would probably have put the terra sigillata on the lid while it was sitting on the jar, burnish it up, then take the jar off, set it aside, and apply terra sig to the rest of the form and burnish it as I go. So that's going to be the sort of peak challenge form for this term. Getting all your proportions right, stretching out the form without it collapsing, not digging your trim tool in the top of it. All these things are areas where you can go wrong, but just give it a few tries, see how you go, and enjoy the process as always. All right, I was able to trim my giant gouge out of that lid and get a lid that works, but I'm not entirely happy with the fit, and that central area is so paper thin that it's making me nervous. So it gives me an opportunity to slow down and show you that lid one more time, and then I'll have two lids to choose from for this final product. So I'm going to set the original lid off to one side and start making a new one with a fresh measurement on my calipers. So I'm going to get a inside diameter for that opening. That is going to be the outside diameter of my flange. That way I'll have a lid that'll fit a little bit nicer. It's not going to wobble around. So that's my measurement. I'm going to set that aside. I've got a little piece of clay here, and I'll show you exactly how to do those steps again. So obviously start out by centering. I'm going to center it on a narrow base because I'm going to be trimming the whole thing dome shaped anyway. opening like a bowl. I don't have to leave a 1/2 inch though, because I'm not going to be trimming a foot ring. I'm just going to be trimming it round. So I want to leave about 1/4 inch in the middle. And I've got just about that, maybe slightly over 1/4 inch. So that's great. And I'm going to just go ahead and round this out nicely. And then I think it's important to keep checking with your calipers before you even really get started. And you can see that I'm already kind of in the range where if I split this rim, part of it could become the flange and drop inside. So I don't need to take it any wider before I go ahead and split. So let's do that. You can do it with a tool, you can do it with your wood knife, but lately I've been just as happy just sort of smushing in with my fingers. So I put my hands on either side like I'm about to take a pull, and then I just push my finger in the middle of that rim and just divide it. So I've got part that's gonna go out over the shoulder of the jar and part that's gonna go down inside the jar. This is obviously upside down from how it'll eventually be. And that's a little bit wide, which is fine. What I'm gonna do now is collar that top, because I actually want it to angle slightly inward so that it goes in easily and then comes down and rests, and where it hits at the corner there, that's where I want it to fit perfectly. So now I've got about a 10-15 degree inward taper, and I can get down and check. And that looks like it's gonna be a really tight fit, which is fine. We want it to be tightly fitted, but we don't want it to be too tight where it kind of wedges and doesn't actually sit down. So what I'm gonna do is 2 things. I'm gonna take my chamois, if I can find it amongst the goop in my bucket, and I'm going to soften the edges of my flange and also my outer edge. And then I'm gonna take the wood knife with its square end and just kind of clean up that corner so I know exactly how it's fitting. Just rounding out that flange. And this hasn't been torched to death too, so it's gonna shrink a little bit, but I don't ever like to count on shrinkage for the fit. I wanna measure it and have it right. All right, and I'm gonna do a little chamois action on the outside edge as well. Just wrapping around. I'm gonna just double check with my calipers and see how much I need to narrow that. And really not much at all, just a touch. So I've got a square corner on my wood knife, and I'm just gonna drop that square corner into the corner and just lightly press inward. Just clean it up a little bit. And now I'm gonna recheck it with the calipers, see how I'm doing. Still a little bit wide, so I'm just gonna get around it with my fingers and give it a little bit of a collar. Can't really collar a form from one point, so I'm just gonna press in and then crisp it back up with my wood knife. Now we're talking. Yeah, that's perfect. So easy, it goes past that top with no trouble at all because of that inward taper. And then when I got right down to the juncture between the flange that's sticking up now and the rest of the lid that's sticking out, it came to meet perfectly in that little corner. Just gonna scoop the goop out from underneath and then torch this thing, get it stiffened up so that I can go ahead and put it back on my jar form and trim it up. And this time, try not to do anything silly and end up with, I think, a better product in the end, having a lid that fits well and doesn't have any super paper thin parts. I think you want to shoot for uniform thickness in all of these projects because they're going through the stress of an alternative firing. And so I think it's worth having that second lid. And if you make a project like this and you end up with a second lid, we can fire both lids in case one of them drops as we're heading from the kiln to the Abvara solution. All right, shoot some questions to me if you have questions about any of those details, but mainly have fun with this one.